Hi friends, it's Alicia again. This is our third and final video in this series of me discussing Kelly Gallagher's book, Deeper Reading. Thank you guys so much for coming along on this journey. I really do hope that maybe you've learned something, or maybe reminded you of something you've already learned that you can use in your classroom as we delve through this book that's really about reading comprehension. But today, talking about the last third of the book, it's going to be a little bit more about teaching strategies. And I think a lot of these strategies, apply to different subjects. So, hopefully these will be pragmatic for you as well, and something maybe that sparks your interests or reminds you of something you'd like to use again in your classroom. Okay, so let's get right to it because we don't have a lot of time and I got a lot to cover. Gallagher starts out chapter 9 talking about students asking the question. Again, he's an English teacher. That his students come to him and say, why do we have to read this book? I don't understand. He says, don't say things like, because it's a great book, because it's a classic, because you are going to need to know it for an exam or anything like that. He says that doesn't really answer what the kids are really asking, which is the idea of why do we have to struggle with something that's so difficult for us to read. So he says the thing to do is to really put their minds at ease about why they're reading it and say, don't be concerned about why so much right now, because what I'm going to do as we begin our reading is I'm going to give you a framework to work with, and as we work through that framework, you're going to figure out and understand why you need to read this book, because it's going to really enrich your understanding of the world. And he uses a couple different examples. He talks about picking a theme before the students begin reading a book, for instance, or a play, whatever. He talks about Romeo and Juliet and says, one year he started with the theme, some lies should be told, and which of course relates to the story of Romeo and Juliet, and told the kids before they even started reading, this is the theme that we're going to be looking for in this story. And then as he had them read the text, he had them give examples in their own life, a personal time when they should have told a story and didn't, another time that related to their family, one that related to their community, one that related to the country. And he gave an example of a young man who talked about a time in his life where he knew a friend was going to do something to get himself in trouble, and he did not go and tell the friend's parents, and the kid got in trouble at school, got expelled, wasn't allowed to walk at graduation, how he really regretted that. And then he took those examples further, used one from his family, used one from his community, and ultimately talked about how he wished some people who knew about 9/11, that it was about to happen, would have said something, because obviously a lot of lives could have been saved. So really what Gallagher's talking about doing here is, instead of just giving this trite answer about, why do we have to read this book or this play or whatever, is to instead introduce a theme and say, what we're going to try and do is connect this theme that's a very major part of this work to our own lives and the larger community that we live in. And he gives several different books and different examples of themes to use, and I really like the one he used for the book 1984, which is, what does it mean to be a responsible adult in a democratic society? And so giving them that theme ahead of time, as they worked through the book, they would write down examples that address that theme from the book. And so like so many of the other things that he talks about with reading comprehension, they were doing very targeted reading. They weren't just reading the book, they were reading it with a purpose. Jumping on to chapter 9, this is something like that. This particular chapter is just me all over the place because I'm all about this kind of thing. He titles it Reading the World, but he's really talking about reading comprehension as a critical thinking skill. I was fortunate enough, I went to Miami University in Ohio back in the 90s, and I was lucky enough to be in a program where it was an interdisciplinary program, and the focus was always critical thinking skills. So regardless of which one of our classes we were in, we always had a theme that we carried through all of our core classes. And that theme was all about uncovering critical thinking skills across the disciplines. So I'm all about this, and I think it was probably one of the greatest things that ever happened to me was to learn those skills and to be able to apply them in becoming a good critical thinker. His examples are things that I've actually done some of my lessons on that I had to deliver in the classroom for class, looking at persuasive techniques in as you're reading, euphemisms, talking about the difference between what's said in a euphemism and what's really meant, like previously owned vehicle versus a used car. He has them critically read advertisements. He has them read newspaper articles, compare bias in newspaper articles. He talks about the use of statistics to kind of manipulate opinion. Excuse me, my nose is a little runny. All that kind of stuff, I'm all about it, because I think that that is absolutely what it means to be able to comprehend, we've been talking about comprehension, comprehend what's really being said to us, what's being communicated to us. So he says, in his experience, a lot of people, English teachers, balk at this idea because they want to teach, great literature and great classics. And his point is, if what we're really doing is teaching our kids comprehension skills, we still have to teach them how to use them pragmatically in the real world, because the goal is to be able to stretch that thinking beyond just a novel. So yes, you can use those skills in, for instance, analyzing the Grapes of Wrath, but you still need to be able to read an article about a local election and really understand what it is that a politician is, the platform they're running on. So those things are really important. And his quote is, "I want them to be able to analyze literature in my class, but the bigger goal is that they develop these cognitive skills to a level where they may be transferred beyond the classroom." And I think that's wonderful. I could not agree more. Gallagher is right on target with my philosophy, which is it's not just really for me about teaching a particular work or even a particular subject, but teaching kids how to think. Once you become a proficient thinker, everything gets so much easier. It doesn't matter what subject you're teaching or learning or what you're reading. If you develop skills of a good thinker, the world is your oyster. And isn't that what we all want, ladies? We all want to give our kids the opportunity, all of our students the opportunity to be such good thinkers that when they're out on their own, out of the shelter of our wings, that they can really soar. So I just loved that chapter, and I was totally on board with it. And coming to the next chapter, it's the art of teaching deep reading. So this is what I was saying about, this is all about teaching, this section. It's not really necessarily specifically related to English teachers. He talks about lesson planning. He talks about reverse lesson planning, and how what he's really learned over the years is that he says teaching should not drive the assessment. The assessment should drive the teaching. So he says forget about like these multiple choice tests after kids read a book, where all you're trying to do is uncover what particular details of the story they remember, because that's not good reading for them, and it's not really good assessment for you. What you want them to be able to do is identify particular things. So decide ahead of time, and this comes back to what he was talking about themes earlier, decide ahead of time what you want your kids to learn from that particular text. Let them know. He says, I give my kids my final exam question before we even start reading the book, because I want them, as they're reading, to be looking for what they're going to need to back up, because it's usually an essay is what he does for his assessments. I want them to know as they're reading what they're going to need to be looking for to back up what they're going to tell me about the story in their essay. So, it could be different for different subjects, but I certainly understand for English why that's important and why he would do that. He says just be careful of two things. One is over-teaching the book. Taking too long on a text, delving too deeply will get the kids bored, and they'll get weary. of the book. So don't do that. Figure out 1 or 2 things you really want them to get out of it and make that a good, enriching lesson. And don't overload them, I agree with this, on strategies and techniques, because you don't want to break up their reading into these choppy little pieces so that they don't really have that holistic experience of reading the text. And don't let the student become over-reliant on you. They still need to be able to come to some connections on their own without having you spoon-feed everything to them. Both good points. And just one more thing that reminded me of, that's a personal experience that I wanted to share. When I was in college at Miami University, I don't know how many of you know this, but I minored in film studies. And I had to take a class on sci-fi film. I promise this relates to what I'm talking about. Coming to class very first day. And you want to talk about great framing. Our professor said to us, okay, listen up. I'm going to get this out. Very first thing, don't ask me if we're going to watch Star Wars in this class, because Star Wars is not a science fiction film. It's a fantasy. It has a princess, it has an emperor, it has knights that fight with swords that are lightsabers, but they're basically swords. There's a rebel alliance there. He gave us all these examples. He says Star Wars is a fantasy movie that takes place in space. Just because it takes place in space does not make it a sci-fi film. However, we are going to be covering some themes that recur over and over again in sci-fi. For instance, time, being able to move through time, the importance of time. So we're going to watch Time Bandits. The idea of artificial intelligence and technology. So we're going to be watching Aliens. So he gave us, he went down a list. He had thought this out so carefully and told us exactly up front, number one, what we were not going to be watching, talking about, analyzing in class, and why we weren't. Made it very clear. And then said exactly what we would be doing. So I knew when we started our unit on time and we were about to watch Time Bandits, before we even watched that movie, I knew exactly what we were looking for. And it gave me such a greater, deeper understanding of that movie than I would have had if he just said, okay, today we're watching Time Bandits, here we go, and turned on back then I think it was a VCR, ancient technology. Anyway, the point is he did exactly what Gallagher suggests, which is letting our students know up front what exactly it is that we're going to be looking for together. And I think that can not only provides purpose, but I think it eases anxiety. Because when we encounter something that's very unfamiliar to us or that we know is going to be challenging, it's easy to come into it with the attitude of like, I'm just never going to get this. This is too difficult for me. I'm never going to get it. I'm never going to understand. But if the teacher says, look, I know this is complicated. I know this is going to be hard for you. It's hard for me. Gallagher says, I've read Hamlet over 50 times and I still don't completely understand everything about it. It's good to be humble. It's good to be humble and say to our kids, yeah, this is challenging and I get it. And it's a little intimidating to me too, but forget about that. Let's just focus on this one thing. Let's just focus on symbolism. Let's just focus on characterization. And if you take that one thing and give them that targeted purpose, then once they're done reading and they've built up their skills and their confidence, then maybe later they encounter that text again and they are able to see even richer, deeper themes and uncover more about it. So all that stuff, I think that he says, it's great advice. I've seen it play out in my own experience, both as a student and as a teacher, and I'm sure you guys have too. So that's it. That's the end of the book. It was great. I really did. I'm glad that I read it. I really did learn a lot of things that I think that I will be able to read in the classroom. And it's nice to read something written by an actual teacher because it's got great pragmatic applications for what we'll be doing. And really, that's what it's all about. I like theory and I like reading about theory, but when it comes down to it, at the end of the day, we have a job to do, and that's to deliver. And we want to deliver good teaching to our students. And that's what you guys do. And I'm so grateful that you've come along with me on this assignment and for your friendship and for everything you do. Thank you so much. Love you guys. Bye.